Hey, Shalom, Akim Shalom. Before I begin this lesson, I want to start off by giving all glory, honor, and praises to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham Rachakodash, and double honors to the elders and apostles of Great Millstone who taught us this truth. A sincere Shalom to the hopeful electors out there listening, learning, and or teaching. Shalom, Shalom to you all. All right, so I just want to bring a quick lesson through the spirit and power of Yahweh Bahashem Yahweh Shai. This is Psalms chapter 1 and verse 1. It says, "Blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor standeth in the way of sinners, nor sit in the seat of the scornful." All right, verse 2, it says, "But his delight is in the law of Yahweh, and in his law doth he meditate day and night." Okay, and it's basically just telling you that, you need to have the Lord in your thoughts, the scriptures, because ultimately it's not just, the Mosaic law. Yes, that's a big part of it, but also there's, the entire scriptures are giving us commands. We're commanded to prophesy, and who told us that? The Lord Yahweh Shai told us to go into all the earth and, preach the gospel to every creature, right? Roughly paraphrasing. Okay, if you go into the Mosaic law, it tells you how, the Lord will raise up a prophet from among our brethren, right? The Israelites, and that we should listen to him. All right, and that's, basically telling you of Yahweh Shai. Before he came on the scene, the Lord had told us that he was going to be our leader. Okay, and so, by extension, really everything Yahweh Shai told us is a command, okay, of Yahweh ultimately, because Yahweh Shai, he said, "I come not to do my own will," right? Roughly paraphrasing, but the will of him that sent me. You see what I'm saying? So it's the Lord's, ultimately the Heavenly Father established his son Yahweh Shai to be, our leader. All right. So yeah, we're supposed to really go into all the scriptures and, you know, as we know, through starting with the apostles and elders of GMS and the men on down, we have the 100% truth of the scriptures, the 100% truth. Okay. But yeah, just getting back into it, just back to the point. Um, no matter what's going on in your life, no matter where you are, you might take a vacation, you might go visit some family, you might, something might happen that's out of the ordinary, that's not part of your daily routine. Okay, you still got to make it a point to keep the Lord in all your thoughts. Okay, don't let certain things in life throw you off. Okay, I want to grab a scripture here. This is Psalms chapter 10 and verse 4. It says, "The wicked, through the pride of his countenance, will not seek after the Most High. The Most High is not in all his thoughts." You see, so this is a perfect example of what not to do, right? Don't be like the wicked. There's other precepts that talk about, envy not the oppressor, roughly paraphrasing, right? So we're not supposed to be like these other heathen nations out here that basically, they're so proud they think they got it. You see these different countries, China, Japan, of course, Babylon, America, right? And they pride themselves in what they have built and their way of life, all right? But as we know, according to the scriptures, only the Israelites have the way of life, okay? And who are the Israelites today? They are the so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native American Indians, okay? And, those of us who have come back to our true heritage and, have the 100% truth of the scriptures, guess what? Hey, we have the ways of life, okay? We have the blueprint for a perfect society, a perfect utopia, And ultimately, those of us who are of the elect, Well, guess what? In the world to come, in the kingdom of heaven, we're going to be kings and priests. Okay? All right? But, basically don't be like these heathen nations, man. All right? And what is one attribute that they have? It says the wicked through the pride of his countenance will not seek after the Most High. The Most High is not in all his thoughts, right? So the Most High is not in all his thoughts. All right, they don't really meditate on the words of the Lord. They don't really consider that their ways could be wrong. Okay, and the point of me bringing that out is to show you an example of how not to be. Okay, and those of us that are in this truth, we basically meditate on the scriptures. Okay, but don't let your some odd event, or like I said, you might be visiting family, you might be traveling, whatever. Okay, don't let a day go by where the Lord is not in all your thoughts, man. Okay, and I'm speaking to myself first and foremost, because right now I'm not in the most ideal place, but I'm making this video, because that's what we're required to do. And so ultimately, it can be hard to make a video or, do a lesson, especially if you get caught up in something. Let's say you're working 10-hour shifts, 12-hour shifts. Okay, at the end of that 12-hour shift, all you can think about is your job, because your mind's just been on autopilot for 10, 12 hours. So now you got to wind down. You might have to have a meal, take a warm shower, whatever, so you can snap out of that work mode and get into your lesson. All right, but really you ought to be meditating upon the Lord even when you at your job, whenever you get a chance. If you get some downtime, even for a few minutes, you can just think about the Lord in your thoughts. Okay, when I used to work at a warehouse, basically we would get some downtime up to like 30 minutes, an hour, a machine breaks, or whatever. It's pretty common, especially here in Babylon. They'll run equipment until it's pretty much destroyed before they actually fix something. Other than that, it's just patching shit up, put a band-aid on the problem type shit. But anyway, back to the point. Basically, when those times would happen, I would get on my Bible app and just read scriptures. I might even play a brother's video real quick, even if I could only listen for 2 minutes. Whatever you got to do to keep the Lord in your thoughts. One thing I've been doing recently is, reading a psalm every morning as soon as I wake up. I've been doing the best I can to do that, and there's something about starting the day off in the right direction that helps a lot. Because when you start the day, the way you start the day is going to dictate how the rest of your day works. And that's why a lot of people in the world, especially in hustle culture, they tell you, one of the biggest things you got to do is don't hit the snooze button. Because when you hit the snooze button, now you are, already proving it to yourself that you're starting the day off on the wrong foot. Already being defeated by the alarm clock. And if that's how you're going to start the day, that's basically, setting the foundation for the day. So you want to set the foundation for the day in the right mindset, basically getting into the word. Of course, praying before your feet even touch the ground is the best way to do it, or praying as soon as you can, man. Maybe you got to use the bathroom, whatever. But, within the first 15 minutes of waking up, man, noticing, you got air in your lungs, the sunshine is shining through the window. Okay, I ought to pray, say the Lord's Prayer, throw up the curses, on this wicked ass place, and go ahead and get your psalm in if you can, man, and just taking the opportunity, man, because if the Lord is not in all your thoughts, man, you might just be wicked, And I'm not saying that to to brothers, but it's just something you ought to be considering, man. Like, if you're in this thing sincerely, you really don't want to be in Babylon. So you're always thinking about the Lord. You're always thinking about, because, the thing is, if you get caught up in Babylon, in your vacation, in your job, visiting family, visiting friends, whatever, if you're getting caught up in that to the point where the Lord is not in your thoughts, or where you forget about the Lord, that's showing that there's a problem, man. Okay, and this is why the scriptures talk about, getting into the scriptures and thinking about the scriptures. Okay, this is Joshua 1 and verse 8. It says, "This book of the law shall not depart out of thy mouth." Right? So the scriptures, you're supposed to read them every day. And I even like to read them out loud. Because when you read them out loud, it does something different than just looking at words on paper. You can read it, but did you actually read it? Did you actually internalize what it said? Or were you reading it just to read it? You see, but when you say it out loud, it cuts that process off, that process of bullshitting. Okay, because when you say it out loud, now you have to say it, read it, and hear yourself. So now, it gives you that extra, just that extra ability to comprehend what you're actually reading, for lack of a better word. Okay, and it says, "But thou shalt meditate therein day and night," which the word meditate means to think upon, right? So when you read in the scriptures, you're thinking about them, okay? And this is the Lord speaking to Joshua, by the way, the Lord Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai, okay? So it says, "But thou shalt meditate therein day and night, that thou mayest observe to do according to all that is written therein." So, right, so you want to please the Lord by following the instructions that are in the book. Well, guess what? You ought to read the book and think about it day and night. Okay, every day. Okay, don't get distracted. Yeah, you might have worked a 10, 12-hour shift. Yeah, you may be, spending the day with your woman doing a lot of things. You might be visiting family. You might not have seen them in over a year, whatever. Take the time to escape, go to the bathroom, go to your car, whatever you got to do, and give the Lord his time, man. And really, of course, you're going to have time in the morning. You're going to have time later in the day. But even in between all the activities and all the shit, you got to make a lesson, man, because we got a job to do. We got a duty, man. And however we got to do it, we got to make it happen. Okay? And, because here's the thing, man. You can bullshit one day and think it's all good because you make up for it the next. But one bullshit day leads to another bullshit day. And that could eventually lead to you falling out of the truth. Okay? I know that could be a stretch, but at the same time, it's not. Because, that's how people fall out of habits. Let's say you're on a diet. One cheat day leads to another cheat day. Next thing you know, you're no longer on a diet. You see? So it says, I'm going to read it again because this is important. It says, "This book of the law shall not depart out of thy mouth, but thou shalt meditate therein day and night, that thou mayest observe to do." And that part that says that thou mayest observe is really pretty much saying, Salakia, 1 second. Yeah, it's basically saying, you want to meditate. Why? Because you'll be able to observe and do according to all that is written therein, right? So how are you going to be able to follow the instructions if you're not even thinking about the instructions, man? If you're distracted, and a simple analogy for this, let's say somebody gives you some instructions on the job, or let's say you box or you do sports. Somebody tells you, okay, you're gonna start with the 1, then you're gonna do the 2, then you're gonna do the 3, then you're gonna do some head movement, whatever. It's just an example, man. All right. let's say you got distracted while he was telling you the instructions. Well, it's too bad. Now you're in a fight and you can't remember what he said. You see, so that's how important it is to think. You see, now the people around you can't see that you're not paying attention. And that goes into being sincere. Are you in this thing for attention, fame, money? Or are you in this thing because you truly, sincerely believe in Yahweh Bashim Shai and his purpose, and you want to do the Father's business, roughly paraphrase, for lack of a better word, you want to do the Father's business, like Yahweh Shai, you want to be a follower of Yahweh Bashim Shai. You want to be a servant of the Lord. Okay? So, it's not just about looking the part, it's about being the part, inside and outside. Okay? Let's see. For then thou shalt make thy way prosperous, and then thou shalt have good success. Yeah, because ultimately that's what we've got to do, is fear the Lord and keep his commandments. Like the scriptures say, this is the whole duty of man. In Ecclesiastes, it talks about that. And then what else we got? I got a couple more precepts I want to go into. We're going to go into Matthew 12 and 34. O generation of vipers, how can ye, being evil, speak good things? Right. So someone who's actually internally evil, like I believe this was the wicked scribes and Pharisees at the time that Yahweh Shai was speaking to, right? So how can they, being evil, speak good things? For out of the abundance of the heart, which is the mind, the mouth speaks, right? So the words that come out of your mouth, how you carry yourself, what you do, that all stems back to how you are inside, right? If you're wicked, Salakia for that. But basically, like I was saying, let's read that again. For out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks, right? So out of the abundance of what is in your spirit, in your mind, in your heart, that's what's going to come out of your mouth, right? So if you're having a good time, having conversation, talking about worldly things, which there's nothing wrong with that. We got to do our worldly business. We got to go to our job. We got to communicate with people in this world. We have a social life, whatever. But if that's all that's coming out of you, right, that means that the Lord was not in your thoughts today. Okay, so the Lord's got to be in your thoughts enough to where you think about this ministry, you think about your duty. And part of our duty is making these videos consistently. We here in GMS, we like to do at least a video a day. Okay? And then we go to camp, we go to the highways and byways and preach on the street like it was commanded of us. Okay? And if you can't make a video, it might be because the Lord was not in your thoughts. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. So, if you're not thinking about the Lord, if your mind is somewhere else, it's going to be very hard to hit the button and, the words of the Lord come out in a way that's edifying, right? And, I'm not saying you always got to have a lesson no matter what, like any second. Sometimes you need an hour to prepare. If you had a rough day, if I went to the plantation for 12 hours, man, I can't just turn the camera on usually, right? I mean, sometimes it can happen, but, I'll need a good hour to just calm my mind down, get my mind straight. Maybe I'll read a chapter in the scriptures, but, whenever you get time, every day, man, you got to touch base with Yahweh Bashim Shai. You got to feed the sheep every day, man. It's just like your physical flesh. In the ancient world, we ate once a day or once every other day, depending on, the time period and, the time of year. But basically, we didn't eat like here in America where you eat till you're sick, 3-4 times a day and shit like that. But, the point being, you got to eat at least once a day. Okay, and it's the same thing spiritually, man. The sheep gotta be fed at least once a day. Okay, so, we got to make sure that we're feeding our spirit so then we could feed the sheep. You see? So this is a duty. This is something that's important, man. All right, it's not just about making videos. It's also about staying in the fight. If you're in boxing or you're in jiu-jitsu, Muay Thai, whatever, you gotta work out. You gotta work on your cardio. You gotta stretch. You gotta do your drills. You gotta do all that just to be able to step in the ring and be your best. Okay? And if you're going out partying, bullshitting, forgetting about the sport, and then you think you're gonna come into the ring with the same pride that you did, when you were actually taking it serious, you might get your ass kicked. You see, and it's the same thing in this truth. This truth is a discipline. So we gotta always be touching base. Even if you doing something that might throw you off, don't be thrown off. Find time, make time. Even if you just gotta show up and make a quick 5-10 minute. All right. So with that, I believe that's pretty much all that I wanted to go into. But yep, with that, I pray this lesson was edifying to the hopeful elect. I want to finish off by giving all glory, honor, and praises to Yahweh, Bahashem Yahweh Shai, Bahashem Rachakorash. Double honor to the elders and apostles of Great Millstone who taught us this truth, and a sincere shalom to the hopeful elect that's out there listening, learning, and or teaching in truth and sincerity. Shalom. Shalom wa. Abad Babal. Shalom.